Hi everyone, just wanted to do a follow-up ramble to the video that I uploaded this morning, which has stimulated quite a lot of conversation and interest. So there's a few things that have arisen that I didn't include in the last video, so I thought I'd talk a little bit more on the subject, and it's given me an excuse to get out of its retirement this sort of piece of terrain that I cobbled together many years ago. It's a kind of real mishmash of various bits of resin terrain that I purchased, and like the gabions and so on, and a schoolhouse building in the centre at the top of the hill, and bits of scratch building with matchsticks and plastic card and polyfiller, all the usual stuff. So I thought it came out quite well, and I've liberally peppered it with various pieces of 15mm Confederate artillery. It's all Freikorps, but I wanted to show you that I don't kind of practice what I've been preaching, and I'm as guilty as anyone of putting the gun crews in the wrong positions and so on. Just talk a little bit more about them, and also after this show you a few other examples, and another book which Terry Druitt pointed out I had on my bookshelf and didn't refer to, which is actually answers a lot of the questions I posed in the last video. So let's just zoom in a little bit on say these figures over here. I have to do it in a way where it's, I think you'll find that's in focus, I don't know. Yeah, I think that is. Okay, so as I say, they're all Freikorps figures. Their figures, if I remember correctly, for the artillery come 4 figures to a pack. Yeah, I think it's 4 figures to a pack, and you can either get them with slouch hats or with KPs, so there's a mixture here, but that only gives you 4 poses, and they seem to be a person with the rammer. Now I've noticed that all these rammers have sponges at both ends. They don't actually have a rammer, so I think you might be able to see it better on that one. So I can't see the point of having a, 2 sponges, one because it means that this person then has to put that down and then pick up the rammer. So I think that's probably an error on Freikorps' behalf. Yeah, so you get that figure. You get another one which seems to be standing there doing very little, but notice has a pouch. So he must be the chap who I think is the one that's responsible for putting his thumb over the vent hole as well, and he must be the one that's got the fuses in his pouch there. You get a kind of an officer figure, someone kind of supervising, and you also get a figure with a cannonball. There, so apologies if this is out of focus. Yeah, there's a figure bringing a cannonball up to chest height, so he's presumably putting it into the muzzle of the cannon. And the KP figures are identical poses, but just with KPs on instead of a slouch hat. There's one, they do differ a little bit. The standing kind of supervising figure, I think I might be wrong, I think there might be 5. Yeah, no, there's 5 or 6. Yeah, because there's another one here you can see holding his thumb over the vent hole, and there's another chap who's like looking as though he's supervising what's going on. And what was the other one I just spotted? No, that might be it. That might be it now. So that is a good case in point that if you were mixing these up, if you placed the chap with the pouch on the same base as the chap holding his thumb over the vent hole, then you're putting two people who are representing the same role on one base. So that's an easy one. And another mistake you can make, if you notice at the back here, this is a model of a Parrot gun, so it's got the strengthened breech, but it would be wrong, and luckily I didn't make the mistake, to put someone raising a cannonball up to put in the muzzle, because as I showed on the last video, they use a sort of bullet-shaped projectile with a sabot at its base that expands to go into the rifling. So that's another easy mistake to make, you know, for someone like me who doesn't really know what they're doing. Yeah, so I think I'll just give you another look at a bit more of the terrain over here. I think that's everything I wanted to say with this in front of the camera, but there is quite a lot else to remark on, so I'm just going to change things around a little bit. Okay, now this is a piece that I've shown in the past. It's Indian Mutiny figures, 28mm Wargames Foundry, and this sort of makes the point that I was trying to say on the other video, that often these are the only poses you get, and often the poses are kind of contradictory, but they're also a little bit difficult to place onto a base sometimes in what would be the appropriate position. So for instance, here you've got a figure who is clearly kind of moving the wheel. So in other words, he's rotating the wheel in order to angle the artillery piece at a certain into a certain direction. You've got another chap here who is clearly the kind of commander, pointing at the target or whatever and shouting at the crew. Now those two figures you have to place towards the front of the base. There's no getting around it. If you put him at the rear, he would be sort of shouting off into the distance away from the gun crew. And this chap here obviously has to be beside the wheel. So that leaves you with the problem that you've got another figure here who is carrying the rammer. In this case, he has got the rammer on one end and the sponge on the other, and he's got a bucket which presumably has got water in it. But you have to put him towards the back of the cannon, whereas his appropriate role would be where this chap is here. And then finally, you've got a figure who's carrying an example of the worm that you saw in the previous video, where the only place left for him really is there. So you're kind of compelled, you know, you're driven into putting the figures into a certain place. And I didn't really find out whether the person who carries the worm is the same member of the crew who would otherwise be carrying the rammer. My guess is he would. So in fact what's happened is Wargames Foundry have supplied you know, two models for one particular person in the gun crew. I'm only kind of guessing at that, but that I'll tell you why I suspect that in a moment. Now the other thing that I didn't mention, type of figure you might get that I didn't mention in the last video, is I can show you on this a very old minifigs Russian Napoleonic artillery piece. So here I've got a chap with the rammer, thankfully in the right place. I've got a chap with the match setting light to the vent hole, and I suppose I could have put him over here pointing in that direction. Who knows whether it's right or not. There's another chap here just carrying a bucket. You know, could be anywhere. He could be any of the walls, really, couldn't he? And then finally, you've got a chap here who has got a trail spike. Now, I didn't mention trail spikes before, but that would be another figure that would be suitable in a group representing the gun being repositioned and realigned and sighted and so on. And really, that spike, you would put it literally underneath there and then sort of lift up while someone else is at the wheel, turning the wheel so that you can turn the gun. So he's actually in the wrong place, but how do you, on a base that size, there's no room to put him there anyway. So this is all part and parcel of what I was saying, that you're kind of obliged to put the figures on the base. Sometimes there isn't room to put them in the appropriate spot on the base, and sometimes you get figures that are representing different stages of the action, and these are the only, at the time anyway, they were the only 4 figures available from minifigs for Russian artillery crews, so that's all you get. And then at other times you get figures that are duplicating, you know, their roles. So you've got 2 people doing the same thing, like that Ventsman in the on the last on the Confederate artillery. Okay, right now, next bit, very important. I just got to change things around again. Okay, now Terry Druitt quite rightly pointed out that I purchased this book last year, got it for a real bargain price at a second-hand book, not second-hand, a charity bookshop, for 75 pence, and some versions of it go for over £100 on Amazon. But having purchased it, I haven't really paid much attention to it since. And in here there is a wonderful chapter on artillery, and it's got on page 261, if anyone's got it and wants to refer to it, there is exactly the kind of subject that I was fumbling around with, trying to second guess things when it's all explained quite clearly here. And one of the things that it answers my question about, in the Napoleonic era, they did have pre-packed bags of powder rather than putting loose grains into the cannon. So one of these chaps, the Ventsman, was equipped with the thumb guard to put over the vent hole whilst the cannon was being loaded, but he also had a thing to prick the cartridge once it had gone in. And then I think he was the one, he was also had a firing tube, which is the kind of priming amount of gunpowder that goes through the vent hole, and then that is lit by the firer, who carries a match in these days. So it wasn't a lanyard system pulling on a trigger. So that answers that question. That was stupid of me to forget that I had this book, and I could have answered my own questions in that. But another thing that Anthony Granapriego mentioned was that I suspect it's this book that he was referring to when he said he had a book that explained how to position the gun crew around a British artillery piece. But then he said he got some remark that French crew are often reversed, and when he did his French artillery piece, he was criticised for having put some of the pieces in the wrong position. Sometimes, as I've shown you, you've got no option but to put them in the wrong position. But anyway, it's not the case that every single member is in reverse with the French. I suspect what it is that it's this age-old debate between metric systems and imperial systems and driving on the right, or do you drive on the left, and which is better? And because the French have a different system for driving cars, which kind of before that was about which side of the road do you drive your carts and horses and carriages and so on. The driver is always going to be in the centre of the road, or the person that's controlling the horses is always going to be in the centre of the road. So the people sat on the limbers in artillery are going to be in kind of reverse, they're going to be reverse round, and then that has a knock-on effect to the crew manning the gun. And it says here that in Britain, in British guns, the ventsman stood behind the wheel of the carriage on the right of the trail. So it's this chap here on the other side of the gun from the way you're looking at it. But, in brackets, his French counterpart on the left. But notice it doesn't say that the loader and the rammer are reversed around. The reason I reckon that is the case is because predominantly people are right-handed, and it's very hard to actually ram that way. You're much better off standing there and using your right hand more effectively, loading that way. And that is why I think the person that's uses the worm is the same person, because it doesn't make sense if it's convenient to do that if you're right-handed, to then use the worm from the left-hand side. And if you remember that reenactment kind of guy, he was using a worm, and he used exactly that from that side of the gun. So I think that is the reason. So that's just a little kind of a bit of addendum to the previous video. If anything else crops up, I'll throw that in. So once again, thanks very much for watching. Bye for now.